All right. Well, welcome to the March LACOE DAAN meeting, the Data Assessment and Accountability Network. We're happy that you could be here and join us, especially if you're in person. We love having you in person. Um, I'm Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for accountability and data literacy. This is my team up here, including Dr. Hillary Weissman, who's going to be presenting in just a minute, give you some updates from the board meeting. I've also got in the room with me Roy, Karina, and Jeremy. So they actually help everything happen behind the scenes. We very much appreciate them. And of course, we're joined by our amazing colleagues from the LACOE Assessment Unit, Stephen Bartlett and Sarah Nitzos. Whoop, whoop. And just so I do check, how's the volume in the room? If you're, give me a thumbs up if you're in the Zoom room. So make sure that you can hear it. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So this is a hybrid meeting. So if you're online, we ask that you mute your microphone and use the chat feature. We have a lot of people. It's kind of unfortunately too big of a meeting to take questions or come off mute. But if you could just use the chat to ask any questions, we'll make sure to answer them if we can in the course of the meeting. I mean, we always send a follow-up. If you're in person, please raise your hand so we can get a microphone to you so the people who are in Zoom can hear your question as well. And just a quick review of our purpose here for the Data Accountability Assessment Network. We're here to provide the important communication, the things you need to know as a data assessment or accountability leader in your LEA. We like to take an inquiry-based mindset, be open-minded about things. We do consider ourselves a bit of a think tank, and we are going to be leaning into some of you, your expertise later in the extension activity. We are trust and system focused in our thinking, and we hope we as members of LACOE can be responsive and supportive of your needs. And we look at this as a shared responsibility. We gain a lot from our county level network RAN, and we like to bring it back to you, but we have so much experience and expertise in the room that we want to share. We try to use this network and as well as our Wednesdays at 1 assessment meetings to try to spread that amazing knowledge. We have all our resources for today are loaded in our Canvas page. You should have received an email confirming and have a link to the Canvas page. So make sure you check those out. There's a lot of resources that we shared there related to the state board meeting and other things. So they go much deeper if you want to go deeper into any of the topics we discussed today. And then, as always, this information is current as of yesterday. I don't think anything too radical has changed, but it might have, so you never know. So we always like to do a follow-up. So all those questions that you drop in the chat, we'll incorporate in a follow-up Q&A. Any that we can't answer, we'll maybe reach out to Marcus Betancourt from ETS for any of the assessment-specific questions. And I think really a heavy assessment. Make sure you join the Wednesdays at 1 meeting on Wednesdays at 1, and Marcus is always there to do some deep dives on assessment specific items. This is our second to last meeting. We meet again in May, on May 19th. I think we have an in-person location, do we, Karina? Okay, but we will have, we weren't sure that we would be able to secure a room. It's like the Hunger Games, getting a room here at LACOE. And we bribed somebody, so hopefully we will have a room for the in-person component, and I think we actually got a good one. So, but we always try to encourage the people to come in person and make it a little bit of a network opportunity as well. So, just a quick warm up. So, in the chat or next to your neighbor, what do you and I look forward to? We went right past spring, right into summer. So, what do you miss most about spring? Now. We're right into summer, so who knows? But what about spring do you love the most or look forward to? And I'm guessing it's not summative assessment season, but I could be wrong. Oh, sacrilege. So drop in the chat.
In no particular order in the chat. A little break from cow pads and then a extra double click thumbs up. Fresh weather, blossoming flowers. Yeah, spring break, flowers, picnic weather. Not sure, Kathleen, if we're easing into it or we're right there.
Any surprising or unexpected answers in the room? Spring break, I'm guessing, right? Everybody gets a little spring break. Yeah. Well, hopefully that'll put you in the right relaxed mindset for us to talk about accountability. So just a quick overview for the day, our agenda. We're going to dive into some accountability updates. There's a lot going on at this last week's state board meeting. There are a couple of very pertinent CalPADS updates for both accountability and assessment. And we have some professional learning opportunities, both some things we'll publicize up front, as well as I think our assessment team has a bunch of things. Then our assessment team will take a brief break after that. Then the assessment team will provide their updates as well as their professional learning opportunities. And then finally, for those of you who are in the room, we have an in-person extension activity. We're trying to connect a couple different different types of visualizations around assessment outcomes, how they're depicted over time, and how you may use them, how you may communicate them. And again, try to lean into the expertise in the room to find out what people are using, how they're communicating this, and what challenges they may have run into. And this would include a kind of an overview, like how does growth data fit into that? Because that's, of course, so prominent and not necessarily the best understood. But before we get totally started, let's just a shout out to all our California Distinguished Schools. We had a bunch. These are all the districts that were represented in the recent announcement. So they have 3 categories now. And, I used to be able to kind of interpret the dashboard. It's based on dashboard results. I don't honestly know anymore how they completely do it. They've made it a little bit murky, but if your school or one of your schools is on here, congratulations to you. Awesome job. And definitely shows a lot of positive things going on in our county. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Hillary Weissman.
Just button. Okay, and it is nice to actually see a lot of people wearing green. Unfortunately, if you were able to see me, I even thought about wearing green. I had the shirt out, and then I thought it was way too bright for today. Obviously not paying attention. So for those of you that are in green, and even those in Zoom land, I see a few of you, congratulations on remembering. And for that one of you who drove back to her house to put on her outfit, good job. Okay. And as Evan said, as we get into it, there's just going to be a few little updates here. If you tuned in and you watched the state board meeting, it was interesting. There's a lot of things and timelines that may or may not have been met, and things that are going to be kind of pushed down a little bit down the way. And then a few things that there were some action taken on. So we'll cover those, and we'll focus on some key takeaways and what to keep on your radar as we move forward. Before we do that, though, we want to start with an update, as you can see here, on advanced placement and how a relatively small policy change had a pretty meaningful impact on the college career indicator. You may have seen this on your own dashboard if you are at a high school or you are at a unified K through 12 district. And you remember in 2025, the state board approved allowing students to demonstrate CC&I preparedness, not only by passing AP exams, but also by successfully completing AP coursework with a grade of C- or better. This is an important shift, and it recognizes the rigor of AP courses themselves and helps to better capture student opportunity, especially for students who are enrolled in challenging coursework but may not perform as well on a single or timed tests. For many high schools, as I said, in unified school districts, this resulted in noticeable boosts. More students were identified as prepared simply by completing AP courses successfully, and the board specifically asked for follow-up on whether this change made a meaningful difference, and the data clearly shows that it did. You can see that here on this slide with regards to the students from 2024 to 2025 and those that passed AP exams and total AP prepared. Building on that, this slide shows what happened when AP coursework and exams are combined with UC and CSU A through G completion as a plus measure that allows a student to reach the prepared level. When students meet UC and CSU requirements and also complete AP coursework or pass AP exam, it significantly expands the number of students who meet the prepared criteria on the CC&I, as you can see. And what's important here is that this approach better reflects multiple pathways to readiness, not just a single assessment point. Students are able to demonstrate that through the combination of sustained coursework and exams. And as you can see here, the change from 2024 to 2025, the students identified as prepared through these combined measures grew substantially, which reinforces that that policy change had a real and measurable impact. And this is why the board viewed the AP update as a strong example of how small adjustments to the CC&I criteria can improve equity, access, and accuracy in how we report college and career readiness. So moving along here to some March updates, we're going to go ahead and we're going to cover item 3, multiple components that were within there related to the accountability system. And that's going to include college career indicator, the dashboard alternative school status. We'll talk a little bit about priority 1 teacher assignment and how that's going to be displayed and what that looks like. Long-term English learners and how they're represented on the suspension indicator. We'll speak to that. And then we'll wrap it up before we turn it back over to Evan about the academic indicator and the grace periods. For the college career indicator, the board reviewed 2 major proposals. As you can see here, first, the potential addition of the state seal of civic engagement, not as a standalone measure, but as a plus when paired with UC and CSU completion or a CTE pathway. Second, the addition of 3 new high-quality work-based learning measures, internships, student-led enterprise, and simulated work-based learning. These would also operate as plus criteria connected to CTE pathway completion and preparedness. While there was strong interest, no formal action was taken in March, and the board requests additional review, and these items are expected to return for consideration in May. So stay tuned. We'll talk a little bit more about that in May. Dashboard alternative school status. So on this slide, one of the areas where the board did take action, the goal is to strengthen verification for application-based DAAS schools while reducing and reporting the burden on LEAs. The board approved moving forward with updates to the credit deficient definition and shifting validation responsibility to CDE using CalPEDS data. However, the requirement for a minimum 30-day enrollment for high-risk students will be phased in after CDE provides an impact analysis. Importantly, is this action allows pending new schools to move forward in the process with specifics to come. At the same time, existing DAAS application schools will maintain their status pending the analysis. No DAAS renewals at this time. Moving right along to teacher assignment data. Priority 1 focuses on, as we've spoken about before, how teacher assignment data is displayed and understood on the dashboard. One major issue raised by the board and educational partners was a terminology. The term clear caused some confusion. The proposed shift, fully credentialed and properly assigned, better aligns with the SARC and the TAMA reports, as well as terms on local indicator page for the dashboard. Another key proposal is displaying intra-district comparisons to show disparities across schools within the same LEA. The board provided direction in March, and we'll see the proposed display on this next slide here. Okay, so this slide shows like a sample of the proposed intra-district comparison table. As you can see, the intent is to be transparent. It's highlighting the range between the highest and the lowest assigned schools within a district by school type. This table would not apply to single school LEAs or most charters, but it addresses statutory requirements for district reporting. While the concept has been supported, final approval of the display format is pending in May. So moving along to long-term English learners. This item was approved by the board in March. Analysis showed that long-term English learners, as we know, are often being evaluated using the elementary suspension expectations, even though we know that most LTELs aren't considered long-term until 6th through 12th grade. To correct this misalignment, the board approved using the middle school 5x5 colored grid at the school level and the unified K through 12 5x5 color grid at the district level. The goal is more equitable, as we know, and statistically accurate representation of the suspension outcomes for this group of students. And lastly, just an update, as we know as well, the final item in March was the removal of the participation rate grace periods for ELA, mathematics, and science. These grace periods were originally added for testing windows. When we had longer and it was harder to have access and it was limited to have access technology, if you remember those computer cart and charging day shuffling around times. Well, the CDE, their analysis showed that removing them adds a small number of students to the participation calculation, but results in minimal changes to performance colors. So given the improved technology and testing efficiency, the board approved eliminating those grace periods beginning with the 2026 dashboard. As we move along here, I'm going to hand it over to Evan. Any questions, actually? Do you have the mic? No questions. Keep it moving.
So yeah, just to be clear, your current administration of the CASP, they've removed the grace period. So on the one hand, you don't have to worry about them. And on the other, if you do have students transferring in and you're unable to capture them, that could be an impact. And I think Wednesdays at 1, we kind of dove in. You can look back in the 2025 technical guide, and they have these samples, and you can see the samples. Not all of them will be relevant, but any sample where a student was transferring in within the time frame without the grace period being a factor will be applicable. So just look for those examples where student left this district and went to this district, and they were not within the grace period. They're within the main testing window. What happens? Who's responsible? You can sort it out. And if there are any other questions about that, that's a good one for Wednesdays at 1. We can kind of narrow that. So the other thing that happened at the board was this study session and looking at the proposed revisions to differentiated assistance criteria, as well as the overall state system of support. And you may not, your LEA may not be part of differentiated assistance, but if you are, and we have a high percentage, I think it's important to kind of know what's going on at the state level. And I think it's something that districts may have some strong opinions about and may want to share those. Definitely make sure your superintendent, your leadership is aware of the changes that are proposed. So the current education code that's related to differentiated assistance, you may be somewhat familiar with, and it's the evaluation rubrics. That was the original term, but basically it's the dashboard, right? The evaluation rubrics became the dashboard and the 5x5 and the interpretation of those. And so, as we know, an LEA, or we'll say district, will be assigned if you have 2 or more red indicators in 2 or more priority areas, then the indicators are broken up between the priority areas. And that also applies at the student group level, not the all student level. And then there are also the local indicators can be incorporated as well, and there's some new ones. The state board, and this was in the trailer bill last year, which passed, the state board was tasked with, by July 15th of this year, coming up, revising the performance criteria, taking into consideration the findings of some research that was done, the state-funded evaluation on the differentiated assistance system and its implementation, and the need to appropriately focus resources and supports where the demonstrated needs are greatest. What it boils down to is about 40% of the districts across the state are eligible. And if you're considering it from an MTSS model, that's like far too many, right? And the capacity for a county office to really serve the needs of all those districts is what's in question. Of course, in the amount of time that, from the time the study took place, you also had a worldwide pandemic. We all came out and everybody was basically red with chronic absenteeism. So we ended up with a high percentage, and it's been steadily declining. But I still think that the essence of the shift is like we should have fewer districts in DA overall. So we need to look at the criteria. And so there's several factors that are being considered, including the board's own considerations of how they might revise that. So currently the DA criteria, there's 4 methods that you can be identified for differentiated assistance. The first is just on your dashboard, right? The student group performance in 2 or more LCFF priority areas. as represented across the indicators. Method 2 is the performance on the local indicators. And that's a self-reflection piece. So as long as you do it and you upload them in a timely fashion, you share them with your board before July 1st, you're good. So that actually doesn't catch many districts or charter schools in differentiated assistance, or a combination of the two could happen. And then finally, the most recently added criteria is the failure to submit CalPADS data on time per the Ed Code. And then all the eligibility criteria for charter schools, they're the same things, but they are over 2 years. So a 2-year window in which you would meet those criteria and then be assigned. So statewide, and this is just the districts and county offices, you can see that virtually everybody is in that bucket of method 1. So there's always the dashboard that swings up. And when you consider there are about 1,000 districts statewide, this is where you get that 40%, right? So what they're looking to do is reduce. Well, I don't know what the magic number is, but I would imagine it's closer to like 15%. So they're looking for ways that they could reduce that number through either methodology or some other different restructuring of the eligibility. So this could have a big impact also on how you receive supports from the county office. So if your district receives any kind of support through differentiated assistance, this may become a factor in whether or not that support would be available. So the governor in the budget trailer bill actually has some very specific things proposed. Now, the budget would have to pass for these to be enacted, and the legislature has a say in it as well. And the legislative analyst's office had some clear thoughts that maybe we should find out how these would play out first before we commit money to it. So, because the governor's budget also includes money for assistance, so that's really they're behind the structure of the support system. But one of the things they noted was 3-year eligibility, largely to align with the LCAP cycle. And I think what they're seeing is that whack-a-mole where you're in DA, you're out of DA, you're in DA, that doesn't really lead towards any kind of systemic change. So they thought it'd be better if once identified, you're eligible for 3 consecutive years, eligible for the support for 3 consecutive years, right? And this would be the case for districts already received 2 years, so it would be an extension. Charter schools who are eligible only receive 1 year, so it would be an extension. So it's supports, again, not the naughty place. It's actually a good thing to be eligible for that support. What was interesting though is a 3-year identification cycle. So this may start to sound like, well, that kind of sounds like Williams, right? Or you're identified for 3 years and you're just on the list. Or CSI, ATSI, right? You're identified and you're on that list unless you meet the criteria to exit, right? So the 3-year identification cycle would probably narrow. So I think this would be more along the lines of if a student group were to meet the eligibility criteria in the 3 years prior to the creation of this list, then they're in. So that would avoid the whack-a-mole thing, right? So 1 year you have groups meeting eligibility, the next year you don't. So that would be a pretty big change. And I think that alone, we've done some modeling, that would reduce the percentages to like 17% of our districts in our county and statewide. I think about the same. So that would be, I think generally that would be a reasonable consideration. And then there's budget that accompanies this as well. The consideration around the budget is a shift from this differentiated assistance to more of a universal support. So think again, tier 1, it's an MTSS model. So funding that would go to county offices to support all districts in the kind of strategic thinking and systems operations that improve the needs for all students. So the money wouldn't just be focused on the districts in differentiated assistance, but all districts, to avoid getting into a position where you would be eligible for DA. So that's what the governor's budget proposal throws out there. At the same time, the state board heard from the CCEE, and in the state system of support, they're kind of this additional entity that kind of operates outside. They're not the CDE itself. They support differentiated assistance. They get brought in specific areas. They kind of have a high level approach to it. And so they did a report. They convened a core working group that included county office representatives and district representatives, and they had some recommendations. These were interesting, and I'm not sure how well received they are, but good to know. So one of the things they talked about was narrowing the eligibility indicators, right? And so just to like the academic indicators. So not necessarily removing everything from the dashboard, but only making a certain set of indicators be relevant for identification, which, you know, if you've been around long enough, like from the No Child Left Behind days, you may be a little worried that if you're only using academic indicators, isn't that the whole point of having a dashboard where we had multiple measures? And that opinion was expressed by myself at the board meeting, but also by other people, and some board members as well. So I think there is a concern trying to balance the, you know, things like chronic absenteeism and suspension rate alongside those for more of a whole child approach to accountability. They also noted the idea of this single improvement pathway, which on the surface makes sense, which is, well, you know, it's so confusing, DA, CSI, ATSI, all these different criteria. Wouldn't it be great if it was all aligned and there was one kind of coordinated improvement process? And I'll explain to you where I think the shortcomings are in that idea in a minute. I think the CDE also recognizes this, but that was one of the things they proposed. So instead of being eligible for DA based on a district level dashboard, they're saying that any district or LEA that has that meets the CSI and or ATSI criteria, if one of the districts met that for 3 consecutive years, then that district would be pulled in to DA. So you'd be held accountable for school level performance as a district, which doesn't seem to make sense because DA is supposed to be like a district level support. And we know that there are a lot of schools in CSI that have structural components that, and I'll talk about that in a slide. What they also proposed would be a systemic review process. So bringing in a team, possibly from there, they identified the possibility of having some kind of leading organization that would organize these. So I think it sounds like a WASC visit almost, right? And what that team would be comprised of, I'm not sure. It could have, hopefully it would have some county members who know your district and have that local connection, but it could be a state level team that would come visit you and would undergo, and it also kind of sounds like a FICMAT review, right? District instructional leadership and governance system. So that's what they propose as one of the ways to improve the overall system. And then a means by which you can escalate support. So if a district or charter school is not improving over time, there would be a means by which you could upgrade the attention provided or the supports provided. Because there really isn't a way to do that now. There's no way to force anybody, you know, take our support or else, you know, it just doesn't happen that way. So this system would provide that. So that's what they presented. What is a little bit tricky about this, going with the CSI, ATSI model. There's a new eligibility criteria for DA that will go into effect. This is actually in the state's ESSA plan, and it has never been, they have not been able to implement it until next year. So on the 2026 dashboard, any school that is eligible for CSI for the 4th year, that automatically would make the district eligible for DA. So this was in the ESSA plan, but because of COVID, we've never had a year where the identification, we just had the first 3-year identification cycle that took place in 2023 for CSI and ATSI. And we haven't had, this will be the first time on the 2026 dashboard that you could actually be eligible for 4 consecutive years, which would trigger this. And just so you know that what that looks like in our district. So they actually, in the ESSA assistance file, they have a column that's flagged potential 4th year DA. And so you can see, would this school potentially trigger identification for DA for the district, or if you're a charter school, that would be another option. And in some cases, you're like, well, that's actually about 10 districts in LA County. And as you recall, there's 2 CSI, just looking at CSI, there's 2 major criteria for CSI. There's low graduation rate. So you have to have a 3-year average that's higher than 68%. And this applies to all schools, Title I, non-Title I funded schools. And then there's CSI low performing. These are only Title I schools. And they take at a minimum 5%. They usually ends up around 7%. They have to have per ESSA at least 5%. And that's where you see those individual criteria. So the tricky part is the low graduation rate. Oftentimes that's systemic. That's like a continuation school, and they're never going to get, there's no amount of performance because they're structurally set up. A lot of times those schools are set up so that those kids will go back to a comprehensive high school if they catch up with their credits. And so the worry is you're going to have this permanent kind of group of schools, and if those schools then are in CSI, and then by default that districts who within, what the school is within are eligible, then you'll have this permanent class of DA eligible districts that will never leave. And so the state ran some numbers, and they had 168 districts that were in this potentially criteria that they'd be pulled in. But the question, I guess, would be, how do you improve if you have a continuation school where you're always pulling the kids out, sending them back to the comprehensive high school? So you're kind of, you would have this reverse incentive, I guess, to actually close that school or somehow change it so you wouldn't, because that's a lot of districts that we've talked to who have these high schools will say, this is the way the system works and we want it this way. And so we're okay with that. So that's what's at stake, I guess, into the conversation. So just so you know, that's what's being talked about. It would be a major overhaul of the system. And it's worth considering, how might this impact my district, right? What do we have CSI schools? Would we be permanently assigned to DA and with, and reliant on improving a school that we already think is high functioning in what it does? Or are there other criteria? Also that consideration around eliminating all but a small number of metrics for consideration for DA. How might that affect us? So that's the big shift there. And I'll stop for any questions. I know I threw out a lot of letters there. If you do have questions, if anything pops into your head, drop them in the chat. And it's, of course, all of this is still kind of playing out. The one thing that's interesting is just like with the board item, the dashboard items, they kicked the can down the road, but because that statute says by July 15th of this year, they have to make come up with a plan. There are only 2 board meetings left. So they'd have to, by their May meeting, have a plan that then they could approve by July. So there's a lot to talk about, and it's pretty complicated. So I don't know how they'll get there, but expect some changes and we'll keep you apprised of the changes. Okay, some quick data updates. This is the new schedule for end of the year. If you're not a CalPADS person, just know that there's a kind of a massive reconfiguring around the data that's being submitted. Instead of 4 end of year submissions, there's 2. And principally everything, most everything is tucked into end of year 1 with a certification deadline of July 17th. And this is significant because the move of the dashboard to October 15th publication date, everything's got to move up, right? So they looked at what can we move to July 17th and reasonably expect our CalPADS people not to be quitting en masse. So I know some of you are in the room and I think you're probably already starting to sweat bullets, but so this is where most things are. For those summer grads, those don't change. So end of year 2 is the course completion, the career technical ed participants and completers data, the work-based learning, all these will be submitted. And then the 1-year graduate and completer counts, all that is submitted. And they still will do the 4-year adjusted cohort grad poll, after August 15th. So if you have those summer grads, none of that changes. You'll still be able to capture those students as graduates. So important to know, but just be mindful of the fact that everything that needs to be certified by SELPA needs to be certified by July 17th. And then what that looks like, just a few things like, so just some shifting. So the everything end of year 2, 3, and 4 minus the 1-year grad and completers is now in the updated one. Students with disabilities, grads and dropouts between July 1 and July 30th. There is the new expanded learning program submitted, so new data being collected. And then that final deadline, so final certification, same date as they'll pull the cohort, which they use for the dashboard. There's a new Flash that came out and it's loaded in Canvas. This is important. This is kind of a revision or an update of a previous Flash related to English learners and reclassification. And it's very relevant for those of you who are administering the LPAC, right? So there's a May 15th review deadline. So the CD is recommending that you review students closely if you think they're eligible for reclassification prior to May 15th. And then reclassified fluent English proficient status must be uploaded to CalPads by May 15th, so they're reflected in TOMS by May 31st. So you got to do this in a very timely fashion. If you have the exemption, if students are marked as RFEP and TOMS by May 31st, they are exempt from taking the summative LPAC. So you wouldn't, no penalty, they wouldn't be held against you for the participation rate. So you want to make sure that they have that. However, if they're not in there, then and they're not marked as RFEPs, then that would have that negative effect on your LP. Additionally, goes on talking about summer transition and how best to capture, and I think we talked about this in the past, but any student not reclassified by May 31st can no longer use the prior year 24-25 LPAC summative assessments for reclassification purposes. So once that deadline passes, they can only be reclassified using the 25-26 criteria. And then there is that end of year one, which we just noted, the deadline. If you're going to capture those students for recertification for your RFEP counts, you want to make sure that's in the system by July 31st. And you do there's some rules around enrollment, minimum enrollment, and the start date of the SELA record, the English language acquisition record needs to align. There has to be some student enrollment and overlapping enrollment. And they lay out some specific scenarios for summer. And these are good to know. Make sure your CalPads person knows they can continue. We had the case in the past where I think some CalPads people are like, well, you can't reclassify, the school year is over. And it's like, but the process, we didn't get the results, the LPAC results until like the last week of school. And so, but you can continue to reclassify the students. They just have to have one day of enrollment, right? So you can use the RFEP start date equal to the last day of the prior school year. So you can capture them. And particularly if they're transitioning off to another school, that's important. You want to capture them if you're a K-8 or you're a middle school charter school and you want to capture them, you definitely want to try to capture those students for the purposes of your reclass rate. Anything to add, Devin? Will you hand the mic back to Devin? We have our wonderful Devin Guerra in the room from our Moss unit, who's always got insights.
Just really quick, maybe Sarah and Stephen have this in their presentation, but as of March 2nd, there were still about 4,500 ELs who earned a 4 on last year's LPAC who have not reclassified in LA County alone. So that's just for LA County. So it's definitely something to keep your eye on and really have a microscope on those students and look at how close are they to reclassifying and do we want to test them again and how long can we wait before we make that decision to test them again. But 4,500 just in LA County alone who passed LPAC but haven't yet reclassified. So just have that on your radar.
Thank you, Devin. Appreciate that. A couple of things, and then we'll stop for questions at the end of this section. This is a little more of state and federal, but since it includes data, I want to make sure it's on everybody's radar. So the state and federal listserv was included a email last week or maybe 2 weeks ago that this 2024 census data has been released. And this will drive the fiscal year 2026 Title I allocations. There is a challenge window if the numbers look off that's open through March 27th. So they sent out a file and I've uploaded that file. It's at a spreadsheet. So you can look at your district level or charter school. I can't remember if charters are on there or not. The allotment, and this is really the numbers, right? This is census numbers, which then will drive your Title I. It's really impacts your Title I formulas and your eligibility for poverty counts and your percentage of population 517. So it's good to look at also for planning purposes. If you have a school-wide Title I school-wide program, but it's close to that 40% and you see the numbers dropping, you need to make some adjustments because you can only maintain that school-wide status and the flexibility that offers with some additional steps. So just use it for all sorts of purposes. It may not be wrong. I'm not quite sure how you challenge the data, but it's laid out in the memo that we've included here as well. And then a couple data-related professional development series. The CSIS, who does the technical support for CalPads, they're having another series of their statewide data governance academy. We had a watch party here back in October, and we had a lot of people who joined, and they're doing another one. We are hosting another watch party. So you come here to watch on TV, basically. But we facilitate, there's some activities that we will facilitate, and it's good for conversations. We had a good turnout last time. And if you didn't come to that first one, it is designed to kind of build on the previous session, but they have said that you don't have to have come here. So if you think that you may have you may benefit from talking about data governance in your LEA, we encourage you to join us. There's a registration link, and it's good information. It's really comprehensive. They've done a good job, and it really is a team effort. So you want to make sure you bring more than just yourself, but it's good to know, CalPADS people and possibly IT people. They talk about data privacy and other issues that are confronting all of our schools now. We also, speaking of CSI, ATSI, we're teaming up with our amazing LCAP state and federal programs team on Thursday for the ins and outs of CSI, TSI, and ATSI. So we talk about eligibility and requirements for that. So if you are new to a role and you're responsible for CSI or ATSI or TSI schools and the planning they need, I would encourage you to join us. The registration link is there. It's from 10 to 11:30 on Thursday. So that'll be good. It's also recorded, so you can get it later. So if you're registered and you want to have access to it later, just register and watch at your leisure. And then finally, we have 2 sessions left of our Navigating Data series that we've done with 21 CSLA. It's designed for school level leaders, but we see a lot of district leaders there as well, and even some county folks who've come. And again, this is built on previous stuff, but we make it kind of standalone for everybody. So you can still sign up. These are virtual, so 9 to 10:30 on the 2 additional dates. And that said, I want to just take an opportunity now, in case you're leaving, in case you only come for the amazing accountability section. I know who you are. Please make sure you leave us your feedback. Otherwise, wait to fill this out at the end, where you can weigh in with a thorough understanding of what our assessment unit is going to provide. But with that, I think we need a 5-minute break. And so I'll start the timer, and we will be back in 5 minutes.
All right, good morning. Let's get started with some assessment updates. My name's Stephen Bartlett. My colleague here, Sarah Nitzes. We're with Assessment Unit at Curriculum Instructional Services Division. And so we're going to get started with a little bit of data on assessment use and assessment completion. First up is that tool we use to make assessment meaningful in the classroom, interim assessments. This year, the assessment use has far surpassed this time last year. So great news for your usage here. Your statistics have moved up, especially on those new interim assessments, CAST, CAST, the science, and the LPAC interims. A lot of progress there on use of those to get students ready to get an understanding of where students are in terms of those summative goals. And that's where I'd like to start with a bit of a question. So in the chat or with your neighbor, take a moment to discuss this. How are you making interim assessments useful in your LEA? So it's clear that a lot of us are using them more. How are they being used? What's making them meaningful? Drop a note in the chat or turn and talk to a neighbor. How are you using them at your LEA?
From the chat, we have tied them to a cycle of inquiry and provided banked time for data analysis. Teams are using IABs to target and reteach on cycles. Use the ICA, especially in math, to understand how students are asking questions. Thank you guys so much.
All right, let's look at the California Science. This is last year's data for completion right around this time. And so those percentages are completion of each of those domains for the CAA Science. Remember, of course, that CAA Science is a year-long administration integrated into the curriculum and intended to be assessed after curriculum is delivered. So we have about 20% completion of each of those domains. It doesn't indicate whether those are staggered or whether or not that's 20% of the population has been completely tested. We expect an update for 2026 here, potentially in the at the next RAND meeting. But just a reminder, make that happen. Make that year-long administration happen. It's something that is meaningful in terms of that making science assessment look a lot more like science. And part of that is going to be integrating assessment into performance tasks that align with the topics addressed. So California Alternate Assessment for Science administered across grade, across the whole year. LPAC and reclassification, and Devin did mention this. This is just a trajectory graph, and it shows that in terms of school days, in terms of working days, we're, as a county, reclassifying about 90 students every day. So if we are going to make a May date for reclassifying the majority of our students before they must be assessed with the summative LPAC. That probably has to increase. That slope would have to be a bit greater. That May 15th deadline is a procedural deadline, and you'll get pushback from staff that we're able to reclassify when the student is ready, and that is true. You'll want to push that procedural deadline so that functionally you can do your work, so you can make sure that the student is tested with the summative LPAC before it's too late. So after that May 15th deadline, that will be annually, is for the last 2 years, has been reiterated once it's published in the CalPADS update flash. It gets reiterated in a assessment spotlight or in one of the monthly emails. That procedural deadline means that you can get your work done. So make sure that that is driven out to your sites with a procedural note on any of that pushback. In terms of the numbers, that's what those numbers look like. The ones that Devin mentioned, note that there has been an increase in summative alternate LPACs. That's due to students becoming eligible to test with the summative alternate LPAC. So otherwise, we've been decreasing the numbers of summative LPACs. Students who met criteria 1 based on the summative LPAC in the previous year who are now eligible to reclassify. This is just LA County. Statewide, it looks like this: about 22,000 total eligible to reclassify, and as 1/3 of the state of California students, we are about 4,000 of those. This is going to be Sarah.
Thank you, Stephen. So as has been reiterated multiple times today, I will not harsh too much on it, but if you're an LEA coordinator, please make sure you talk to everybody about getting those kids reclassified before they test. Otherwise, you turn into Mr. Potato Head with his angry eyes in, because you will have to go in and go file a stairs case for every single domain for each of those friends. So don't be Mr. Potato Head. I know I went over this last time, but it's really important that I reiterate and clarify the materials that are being returned. First of all, it's FedEx, not UPS. It is going to North Carolina, not New Jersey. The label is no longer in the box and you have to go through a portal. But one thing that's been confusing people are these rolling return dates. These are not hard and fast dates, except the last one. Someone called and said, hey, if I don't send it out on 3/20 and FedEx picks it up on 3/21, do I just have to wait till the next day? No. It's a rolling return date. But I do want to emphasize to everyone, do not hold your boxes. The more documents the state gets, the earlier they're able to do score validation, which means you get your scores earlier. So get those boxes returned on a rolling basis. That last date, June 12th, burn it into your memory. It doesn't mean that you've boxed it and put it in the front office by June 12th. It means that FedEx, the guy or lady, has scanned it in and it has been put on the truck. It must be scanned in by the 12th of June. But otherwise, the states are rolling, so get those boxes flowing. April 1st. It is time to go talk to your superintendent or your superintendent secretary or whoever looks at their emails and remind them that they got an email and they need to find their password and go into Tom's and designate next year's LPAC LEA coordinator. This somehow always slips people's notice, so make sure it's not a joke. It is April 1st. It is not part of April Fool's Day, but it is essential that the next year's coordinator is designated. Otherwise, your superintendent is going to get that magical email with your Moodle AST code and all of the things that you need to launch initial assessment. Oh, sorry, I thought people were calling Evan. I was like, he's right here. The window is open. Look at that beautiful cast on the horizon of a beautiful ocean. It is open. We are now testing, but not everybody is. Raise your hand if you are starting, you're already in your CASP assessment. Okay, I see a couple hands, If you are not in that process, it is important that you start looking at how you are training your test administrators. It is a local decision of how you train those test administrators. You've got three options. You can use the Moodle tutorial, but unlike LPAC, you don't get a fancy certification and you don't have a way of tracking it. So you have to find another way of tracking that. You can do a local training. The state has provided a lovely slide deck as well as a resource guide, an agenda, all the things you might need. There's also some local training information that you can access. The state's provided lots of resources and tutorials, but Stephen and I also put together a LACOE created resource. It is a digital binder with absolutely everything you need to know about state testing. And if you go to slide 32, it's not quite 42, it's 32, it will give you all of the things you need to help train your staff. It's got those door hangers that you need saying testing, go away. It's got the electronic devices reminding everyone that hold up your Apple Watch, now put it in your backpack. Hold up your phone, now put it in your backpack. Hold up your Meta glasses, now put them in your backpack, including the teachers in the room. So if you need help, if you need an idea, the state's provided resources. We also created something for you. Please note that if you're giving the California Alternative Assessment or the CAA, you must complete the Moodle. It is required, just like it is for LPAC. So how are you doing it? What's your plan? Take a minute to reflect. Do you know what your plan is? Do you know what they're doing? Is it a trainer of the trainers? Is it a mass Zoom meeting? Anybody? Going once? You got it. You're on it. All right, moving on. I put all the key dates and events. There is a website that has all of these for you. The state's provided a great key dates and ideas, but I wanted to point out a few things. System downtime. This year it is April 10th through April 14th. Very important to alert everyone on your staff and make sure that is not smack dab in the middle of your testing window. Because sometimes when it comes back up on the 14th, it takes a stutter step. Not always, but sometimes. So it's important that you don't have things down to the minute because you might not be happy. The summative window closes on 5/29. But Sarah, it's 5/31. Nuh-uh. That's a Sunday. So if you're planning on closing out your testing on a Sunday and you have to file a stairs case, if you have to call a success agent, Marcus will not be working on Saturday or Sunday, so you will not be able to access anyone. So just go ahead and put it in your brain that it ends on 5/29. It'll make your whole life a whole lot easier. On 6/5, the initial LPAC supplemental testing materials closes. But wait, that's a little late. No, you might get a new student at the end of the school year, and you are required within that 30-day window to assess them. So if you need more materials, that's when it closes. The final date to complete the summative LPAC, to return it, I already went over that, and the whole assessment kit and caboodle wraps up on the 30th of June. All right, and now I'm going to hand it back over to Stephen to talk about the 1% cap.
All right. One of the things that happened at our State Board of Education meeting was that a note on the 1% cap on alternate assessment. This is part of that process every year is the U.S. Department of Education's response to our missing the 1% cap, going over the 1% cap, and CDE writing a letter. The Federal Department of Education rejected the waiver request on that 1% cap because California didn't assess 95% of students and didn't assess 95% of students with disabilities. That was prerequisite condition for even requesting a waiver. Also did not demonstrate substantial progress in reducing the number of students taking the California alternate assessments, and use increased last year. So your takeaways from that are attempt to test 100% of your students, especially students with disabilities. Don't stop at 95% because 1% cap is a statewide it's a statewide issue. If you are at 95% and everyone else is at just over 95%, those few LEAs, those few special schools that are not testing greater than 95%, that are much lower, are going to have greater effects. So if you can get yourself much higher, closer to 100%, if you can get your testing with students with disabilities higher, great for the state condition on this 1% cap. Also, the takeaway is make sure that your IEP teams are using a tool to evaluate whether or not the CAA assignment is appropriate. And there is a tool. There's a link to that tool. If you work through that tool, you'll find that it is very restrictive. There was an era where alternate assessment was used back in the STAR era a lot more widely, and this tool demonstrates how restrictive that use is. So make sure your IEP teams are using that tool if they're not using it. Of course, on the individual level, it is appropriate to assign a student a CAA if they need it. On to the Atlas project. We've been providing periodic updates at DAAN on the Atlas project. One of the things I wanted to highlight from a recent email from Atlas, and that's this. There's a call for science educators to join the Digital Promise Atlas Performance Test Research Study. So your teachers can get $400 for 6 to 8 hours. This came to you if you have already signed up for Atlas. This came to you in an email asking you to share this with your teachers, with your staff. And the way you got that email is by creating an account. So I want to give you a moment to navigate to ngss-atlas.com and then click the a login button, and then click create an account. Get yourself on this listserv so that you're notified of this extremely important tools updates for California science testing and California science performance task, a bank of authentic assessments. If there's one direction that California assessment is anticipated to go, it's towards authentic assessment. This is a tool for highlighting authentic assessment in your school, in your classroom, in your classrooms. So get yourself on the registration so that you get notices like that. Get yourself registered so that you're aware. Also, I want to reiterate a few notes on Atlas as a statewide resource. It's, of course, a resource for performance tests embedded into classroom instruction. The intent is to make assessment look a lot more, science assessment look a lot more like science. So students engaging in tasks that mirror the work of scientists and mathematicians, they develop deeper understanding and a stronger sense of agency as learners. So very important movement in the world of assessment and supporting that application to real world situations, the meaningful problem solving is a great place to be. One of the things that Downey LACOE hosts is the high school equivalency summer convening. We host that, I believe, in this room, Wednesday, August 19th. If you are responsible for high school equivalency, GED, HiSET exams, get yourself to that, or make sure your staff are aware who deal with GED and HiSET. That will be a registration. A link is on that slide. Of course, there's also other dates if you can't make Los Angeles, but the Los Angeles one is here. Charter School Assessment Coordinator Network, that's a Zoom meeting. If you are a charter in Los Angeles County, it's recommended that you make yourself a part of the statewide Charter School Assessment Coordinator Network. It says these meetings are quarterly, and I think they were previously annually in prior years, but that's on May 27th. So coming up in a few months. From 9:30 to 11. Sign up. There is a link. Somebody that I talked to before the meeting indicated that they were not part of Wednesdays at 1. There is not a link here directly to the Wednesdays at 1 sign up. There is some professional learning here. I believe Sarah can talk to some of it as well. But there is a link at the bottom of the page that goes to something called a Canvas catalog, a catalog in our LMS of everything that's available to you from the assessment department. And I believe there is a link there for Wednesdays at 1. Get yourself signed up for Wednesdays at 1. Be a part of our crew, and that's every Wednesday in the testing season. There's another version of that in summer if you are also here during the summer. Let me see if I can find the presentation. We have Level Up Your Classroom, X Marks the Spot, and our in-person in the summer, June 22nd, Innovate to Educate. We've got presenters on artificial intelligence in the classroom, using those strategies to enhance equity, enhance authenticity of your examples. Districts journey leveraging LPAC interim assessments to better support English learners. And all sorts of tools and resources that you can use. We'd love to have you there. We'd love to have you present. Join us in person June 22nd for Innovate to Educate. And this is our feedback slide. We truly use your feedback to enhance our ability to serve your needs. Please take a moment to fill out the survey, and there is a link and a tiny URL there that you can use to get there. Yeah.
But I think we really need to be there for that if possible. Who is actually facilitating that?
So SBE is going to be the presenter for that. I don't recall who is the actual or who was the presenter last year. I imagine the same team. Does anybody remember who the presenter that last year? That's going to be led by Sacramento County Office of Education. I believe state trainers are going to train. Is it academic or is it bureaucratic?
About what the test actually takes.
So if I'm recalling last year's that I attended, we got information about what the test does, who qualifies for the two different tests in terms of GED versus HiSET, characteristics of a student who could use that test. Has to do with, I believe, grade and age. I believe there was a discussion of process. So if you were looking at equivalent things in testing, it might be like a Moodle LEA certification training for LPAC, or the logistics type of training for an LEA coordinator, or a site coordinator, somebody who has to manage a program for their district. Information for them to be knowledgeable of what the use is, and how to get the right students to the test. And I think we're at a thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if you're in the room, we're going to take a little break here to set up. We have to transfer everything over. If you're in Zoom, thanks for joining us. Make sure you fill out that feedback survey. We do appreciate that. And we will see you again. If not at Wednesdays at 1, we will see you in May at our next DAAN meeting. As always, we appreciate everything you're doing out there. I know it's in the middle of testing season, so it's really busy. We will see you soon, though.